What is cash for keys and who should be using cash for keys? Probably more people than you think. Is it even legal to offer cash for keys? And make sure you stick around to the end where we talk about a successful negotiation for cash for keys. Hey there, Christian Walsh, Wire Associates. We're real estate brokers based in Southern California, helping tenants and landlords and buyers and sellers navigate these crazy days. And we're here with a big update on cash for keys. Remember, we can't give tax or legal advice, but for the most honest real estate advice, make sure you subscribe to this channel. And we used to do cash for keys agreements during the previous bust. When we were listing bank-owned homes, we'd knock on the door and we'd have to figure out who was living there, whether it was the previous owner or tenants. And then from there, we'd negotiate cash for keys. I even gave away a $25,000 check once for a luxury home in Laguna Beach. Now that we're in COVID and we're dealing with a lot of tenants who are in their homes and not paying rent, we're actually doing cash for keys again. And we're gonna tell you all about that. So what is cash for keys? It is literally a sum of money in exchange for the keys to the house. Or in other words, you give an amount of money in exchange to get possession of the home within a given amount of time. So an example would be if an occupant is going to move out within 30 days and hand over the keys, the home in broom swept condition, they would get $2,500 on that day when they turn over the keys. So it's most often done between tenants and landlords to avoid eviction. It was also big during the previous bust when there was a new owner. When it went back to the bank, we'd knock on the door and find out who it was. The old owner could be given cash for keys to get out. If it was a tenant, same thing. The tenant would be offered cash for keys to move out. Is it legal? And the answer is yes, it's legal in all 50 states. I know a lot of people hear cash for keys and make it sound like it's shady or something that happens in a back alley. That is not the case. Cash for keys is completely legal in all 50 states. If there is a rent control area, you may have some extra hoops to jump through. So I definitely encourage you to reach out to a good attorney to discuss. Don't worry, this is not something that you have to hide or not share with people that you're doing. Cash for keys is completely legal. When to use cash for keys? So that's the big question. Basically, the time to do it is when there is an occupant in possession of a piece of real estate that you need to get out of there. So it could be that you're going to be selling, it could be that you want to move into it, or it could be that you want to get a new tenant in there. So any of those reasons would be a time to at least consider cash for keys. In some cases, there may be no other route to go. A good example of this is a tenant on a lease. So the owner must honor that lease, and a new owner would also have to honor that lease. So if you want to sell the property, go ahead and offer cash for keys to that tenant on a lease, also known as a lease buyout. So that would be one way to get the tenant out so that you could move on to the next steps. Another example is squatters, where these are people who have illegally moved into a property and may have tenant rights if they've been there long enough. So of course there's legal routes to go and it'll take time and money, but you can also attempt to offer cash for keys to get the squatters out sooner. Now for a month-to-month tenant, you may find that you can terminate the tenancy and don't have to offer cash for keys, but you need to see how long that's going to take. If it takes 60 days, cash for keys may be quicker. So you have to run the numbers and see if it makes sense. Even if they're month to month, they may be protected under an eviction moratorium. Currently, we have SB 91 in the state of California and the CDC eviction moratorium across the nation, and those are protecting folks who aren't paying rent due to COVID-19. You can't evict those folks, but you can offer cash for keys. Now, some people may find this crazy. So there is a tenant who hasn't paid rent, who owes money, and we're gonna pay them money to move out. And I know it sounds crazy, but it still may be faster and save you more money in the long run to offer cash for keys to a tenant who's not paying rent. We're currently helping a lot of landlords figure this out right now, whether this makes sense to offer cash for keys and then sell the property once they're out. So feel free to reach out and we can run through the numbers to help you make that decision as well. Another big question people often ask is how much? And that is a very complicated question. You can reach out to us for more guidance in your situation. But really, you run all the numbers and you figure out if the savings in time are going to translate to more money, then that's part of the equation. You can look at how much is owed by a tenant. You can look at how much it's going to cost to do an eviction and how long it's going to take. The courts, once we start moving forward with unlawful detainers en masse, it's going to be a pretty slow process and backed up. So what may have taken 3 to 6 months may now take 6 to 9 months. So you start to run those numbers on a non-paying tenant, and it very quickly seems to be a good deal to pay a certain amount. And this is all negotiable, and the landlord doesn't have to agree, and a tenant doesn't have to agree either. But it is a math equation, and ultimately, if you want help, feel free to reach out. But you run the numbers. How much rent is lost if you continue to leave that person in there and they're not paying rent? How much time will it take to get that person out? And then what are your goals? If you're just going to get another tenant in there, that may not be worth as much money, but if you're going to sell and the property can be vacant and fixed up, that may be worth a whole lot more money to you. So that's what you have to do. You have to figure out what your end goal is and then figure out how much it's going to cost and how much the time is worth to figure out with the highest number. Again, landlord doesn't have to agree and the tenant doesn't have to agree. It's all negotiable. Another big question is who pays the cash for keys? And it literally can be anyone. It could be the owner or landlord. It could be a buyer that wants to move in. It could be another tenant that wants to move in. The money can literally come from anywhere as long as the landlord agrees and of course the tenant agrees to the amount, and it could be split. So maybe an owner pays it all, maybe an owner and a buyer split it, maybe the buyer pays it all. So your next question may be, why would a buyer ever want to pay it? If you're getting a good enough deal, again, it's all a numbers game. If you're getting a good enough deal, it may be worth your time to kick in some money as a buyer to get the property delivered vacant on a schedule that makes sense for you. As long as the owner and the occupant agree on an amount and a time period, that's what matters. Where the money comes from, that doesn't matter as much. Let's run through the steps to successful negotiation of cash for keys. And the first step is an obvious one. Reach out to the occupant and let them know that you'd like to discuss cash for keys. And you don't have to give it a fancy name. Just call it cash for keys. That's obvious what it is you want to talk about. If we have a signed listing agreement for a property and we have this situation, we will take care of this entire process. And I will tell you that having a neutral third party like an agent step in for you often leads to a more successful negotiation, because in many cases there's been a lot of water that's gone under the bridge between a landlord and tenant or landlord and occupant. So this neutral third party can come in and theoretically negotiate a better cash for keys deal. Next step is to negotiate. So the occupant is stepping to the table and you guys are going to go ahead and figure out a number that makes sense. I don't like to throw out a number first. I like to say, hey, what dollar amount would have you out in 30 days? And then you go from there. Whatever that number is, you go ahead and negotiate that number. If it's ridiculously high, off the bat, you may find that this is probably not going to go anywhere. Or if it's ridiculously low, you may be pleasantly surprised. But don't be surprised if that number changes. The next time you talk, you may find that the number's gone up or down, but that's all part of the negotiation. Just remember that the landlord doesn't have to agree to the number and the occupant doesn't have to agree to the number. I also don't recommend rushing this phase. It's okay if it takes a week or two to get to a number that makes sense. But once you get to the number and the time that makes sense, the next important part is to get it in writing. We have content coming where we're going to show you a cash for keys agreement that is standard from the California Association of Realtors. We've used it many times. We're going to show you that in a future video. So make sure you subscribe to our channel to be able to get to part 2. But what's important is you want the terms in writing. There's a few other things on the agreement that are important. The other important part is you want all occupants to agree and sign. And this is important because you don't need to have 4 or 5 separate agreements. You're just coming to one dollar amount to have everybody out within 30 days or whatever the agreed upon time period is. So that's important. Get every single occupant of legal age to sign the agreement and agree to it. If they won't all sign, you don't have an agreement, and I don't recommend moving forward. All right, so you've successfully negotiated the amount, the amount of time, and you have a signed agreement with all parties having signed. That's great news. Now you just sit and wait. So now it's time to wait. About a week before the date, you're going to go ahead and you're going to get a cashier's check. You can actually either give cash or a cashier's check. A personal check is not the route to go, and the occupant may not accept a personal check because you can actually put a stop on that. That's not an effective way to pay. So cash or a cashier's check would be the route to go. So you're going to go ahead and get that set up, and you're going to set up an appointment. You're going to set up the time on that last day, that 30th day or whatever that date is. Set up the time to come and visit the property for the walkthrough. So it is the day to do the cash for keys transfer. And one thing you're going to do is you're going to schedule a locksmith. We'll talk about that in a minute. But this is the day you show up, and be patient. It may be a few hours later than you expected. Some people underestimate how long it takes to move out and have it broom swept. But you're going to do your walkthrough. You're going to walk through the house, make sure it's clean. It doesn't have to be spotless, just broom swept. But make sure all the personal belongings and trash are out. You're going to open cabinets, look in closets, open the garage, walk around the property. Now, if there are things left, you absolutely do not give the check. Don't give the check and fall for the old, we'll be here tomorrow to get that. No, if they really will be there tomorrow and you believe that, you're going to reschedule giving them the check. Otherwise, you can wait around for another hour or two to make sure that disappears and then give them the check. But do not hand it over until it is completely cleared out. At the time you hand over the check, you're going to have a receipt signed, and in our second part of this video, we'll show you a simple receipt, nothing fancy. You're going to ask for all the keys and remotes for the property. If there's a pool key, mailbox key, get as many keys as you can. You want to get those all from the occupant. The last step is you've already scheduled an appointment to have a locksmith come and change the locks before you leave. So that's important as well. You want to get the locks and access to the property buttoned up so that nobody else can come in. The previous occupant, of course, and then you don't want squatters moving in. So make sure you have a locksmith lined up to change the keys. So that's it. We've successfully negotiated cash for keys. Again, a neutral third party often helps. Bear in mind that if you're in the state of California, that it can either be you as the owner negotiating cash for keys, or a licensed real estate broker or agent can also negotiate on your behalf, but they must have a license to do it in the state of California. So leave your comments below. Let us know. Have you negotiated cash for keys? Are you considering negotiating cash for keys? Would you never give cash for keys? Leave a comment below. We want to hear. Of course, we welcome your questions. We'd love to have you subscribe to our free weekly email newsletter. It comes out on Sunday at 11:30 a.m. every week. We'd love to have you subscribe to that. There's a link below so you can do that. And of course, subscribe to this channel. We got more great content coming for landlords and tenants and buyers and sellers. This has been Christian Walsh with Wire Associates, and we appreciate you.